Section 19. The Industrial Village. In describing the operations of the Household Salvage Brigade, I have referred to the enormous quantities of good, sound food which would be collected from door to door every day of the year. Much of this food would be suitable for human consumption, its waste being next door to sinful. Imagine, for instance, the quantities of soup which might be made from boiling the good, fresh, meaty bones of the great city. Think of the dainty dishes which a French cook would be able to serve up from the scraps and odds and ends of a single West End kitchen. Good cookery is not an extravagance, but an economy, and many a tasty dish is made by our continental friends out of materials which would be discarded indignantly by the poorest tramp in Whitechapel. But after all that is done, there will remain a mass of food which cannot be eaten by man, but can be converted into food for him by the simple process of passing it through another digestive apparatus. The old bread of London, the soiled stale crust, can be used in foddering the horses which are employed in collecting the waste. It will help to feed the rabbits, whose hutches will be close by every cottage on the estate, and the hens of the colony will flourish on the crumbs which fall from the table of Dives. But after the horses and the rabbits and the poultry have been served, there will remain a residuum of eatable matter, which can only be profitably disposed of to the voracious and necessary pig. I foresee the rise of a piggery in connection with the new social scheme, which will dwarf into insignificance all that exists in Great Britain and Ireland. We have the advantage of the experience of the whole world as to the choice of breeds, the construction of sties, and the rearing of stock. We shall have the major part of our food practically for the cost of collection, and be able to adopt all the latest methods of Chicago for the killing, curing, and disposing of our pork, ham, and bacon. There are few animals more useful than the pig. He will eat anything, live anywhere, and almost every particle of him, from the tip of his nose to the end of his tail, is capable of being converted into a saleable commodity. Your pig is also a great producer of manure, and agriculture is, after all, largely a matter of manure. Treat the land well, and it will treat you well. With our piggery in connection with our farm colony, there would be no lack of manure. With the piggery there would grow up a great bacon factory for curing, and that again would make more work. Then, as for sausages, they would be produced literally by the mile, and all made of the best meat instead of being manufactured out of the very objectionable ingredients too often stowed away in that poor man's favorite ration. Food, however, is only one of the materials which will be collected by the Household Salvage Brigade. The barges which float down the river with the tide, laden to the brim with the cast-off waste of 500,000 homes, will bring down an enormous quantity of material which cannot be eaten, even by pigs. There will be, for instance, the old bones. At present, it pays speculators to go to the prairies of America and gather up the bleached bones of the dead buffaloes in order to make manure. It pays manufacturers to bring bones from the end of the earth in order to grind them up for use on our fields. But the waste bones of London? Who collects them? I see, as in a vision, barge-loads upon barge-loads of bones floating down the Thames to the great bone factory. Some of the best will yield material for knife handles and buttons, and the numberless articles which will afford ample opportunity in the long winter evenings for the acquisition of skill on the part of our colonist carvers. while the rest will go straight to the manure mill. There will be a constant demand for manure on the part of our ever-increasing nests of new colonies and our cooperative farm, every man in which will be educated in the great doctrine that there is no good agriculture without liberal manuring, and here will be an unfailing source of supply. Among the material which comes down will be an immense quantity of greasy matter, bits of fat, suet, and lard, tallow, strong butter, and all the rancid fat of a great city. For all that, we shall have to find a use. The best of it will make wagon grease. The rest, after due boiling and straining, will form the nucleus of the raw material which will make our social soap a household word throughout the kingdom. After the manure works, the soap factory will be the natural adjunct of our operations. The fourth great output of the daily waste of London will be waste paper and rags, which, after being chemically treated and duly manipulated by machinery, will be reissued to the world in the shape of paper. The Salvation Army consumes no less than 30 tons of paper every week. Here, therefore, would be one customer for as much paper as the new mill would be able to turn out at the onset. Paper on which we could print the glad tidings of great joy, and tell the poor of all nations the news of salvation for earth and heaven, full, present, and free to all the children of men. Then comes the tin. It will go hard with us if we cannot find some way of utilizing these tins, whether we make them into flower pots with a coat of enamel, or convert them into ornaments, or cut them up for toys or some other purpose. My officers have been instructed to make an exhaustive report on the way the refuse collectors of Paris deal with the sardine tins. The industry of making tin toys will be one which can be practiced better in the farm colony than in the city. If necessary, we shall bring an accomplished workman from France who will teach our people the way of dealing with the tin. In connection with all this, it is obvious there would be a constant demand for packing cases, for twine, rope, and for boxes of all kinds, for carts and cars, and, in short, we should before long have a complete community practicing almost all the trades that are to be found in London, except the keeping of grog shops, the whole being worked upon cooperative principles, but cooperation not for the benefit of the individual cooperator, but for the benefit of the sunken mass that lies behind it. Rules and regulations for the government of colonists. A document containing the orders and regulations for the government of the colony must be approved and signed by every colonist before admission. Amongst other things, there will be the following. Number 1, all officers must be treated respectfully and implicitly obeyed. Number 2, the use of intoxicants strictly prohibited, none being allowed within its borders. Any colonist guilty of violating this order to be expelled, and that on the first offense. Number 3, expulsion for drunkenness, dishonesty, or falsehood will follow the third offense. Number 4, profane language strictly forbidden. Number 5, no cruelty to be practiced on man, woman, child, or animal. Number 6, serious offenders against the virtue of women or of children of either sex to incur immediate expulsion. Number 7, after a certain period of probation and a considerable amount of patience, all who will not work to be expelled. Number 8, the decision of the governor of the colony, whether in the city or the farm or over the sea, to be binding in all cases. Number 9, with respect to penalties, the following rules will be acted upon. The chief reliance for the maintenance of order, as has been observed before, will be placed upon the spirit of love which will prevail throughout the community. But, as it cannot be expected to be universally successful, certain penalties will have to be provided. First offenses, except in flagrant cases, will be recorded. The second offense will be published. The third offense will incur expulsion or being handed over to the authorities. Other regulations will be necessary as the scheme develops. There will be no attempt to enforce upon the colonists the rules and regulations to which Salvation soldiers are subjected. Those who are soundly saved, and who of their own free will desire to become Salvationists, will of course be subjected to the rules of the service. But colonists who are willing to work and obey the orders of the commanding officer will only be subject to the foregoing and similar regulations. In all other things they will be left free. For instance, there will be no objection to field recreations or any outdoor exercises which conduce to the maintenance of health and spirits. A reading room and a library will be provided, together with a hall in which they can amuse themselves in the long winter nights and in unfavorable weather. These things are not for the Salvation Army soldiers who have other work in the world, but for those who are not in the Army, these recreations will be permissible. Gambling and anything of an immoral tendency will be repressed like stealing. There will probably be an annual exhibition of fruit and flowers, at which all the colonists who have a plot of garden of their own will take part. They will exhibit their fruit and vegetables as well as their rabbits, their poultry, and all the other livestock of the farm. Every effort will be made to establish village industries, and I am not without hope but that we may be able to restore some of the domestic occupations which steam has compelled us to confine to the great factories. The more the colony can be made self-supporting, the better. And although the hand loom can never compete with Manchester mills, still an occupation which kept the hands of the good wife busy in the long winter nights is not to be despised as an element in the economics of the settlement. While Manchester and Leeds may be able to manufacture common goods much more cheaply than they can be spun at home, even these emporiums, with all their grand improvements in machinery, would be sorely pressed today to compete with the hand loom in many superior classes of work. For instance, we all know the hand-sewn boot still holds its own against the most perfect article that machinery can turn out. There would be in the center of the colony a public elementary school, at which the children would receive training, and side by side with that, an agricultural industrial school as elsewhere described. The religious welfare of the colony would be looked after by the Salvation Army, but there will be no compulsion to take part in its services. The Sabbath will be strictly observed. No unnecessary work will be done in the colony on that day. But beyond interdicted labor, the colonists will be allowed to spend Sunday as they please. It will be the fault of the Salvation Army if they do not find our Sunday services sufficiently attractive to command their attendance. End of Section 19. Section 20. Agricultural Villages. This brings me to the next feature of the scheme, the creation of agricultural settlements in the neighborhood of the farm around the original estate. I hope to obtain land for the purpose of allotments which can be taken, up to the extent of so many acres, by the more competent colonists who wish to remain at home instead of going abroad. There will be allotments from 3 to 5 acres, with a cottage, a cow, and the necessary tools and seed for making the allotment self-supporting. A weekly charge will be imposed for the repayment of the cost of the fixing and stock. The tenant will, of course, be entitled to his tenant right, but adequate precautions will be taken against underletting and other forms by which sweating makes its way into agricultural communities. On entering into possession, the tenant will become responsible for his own and his family's maintenance. I shall stand no longer in the relation of father of the household to him, as I do to the other members of the colony. His obligations will cease to me, except in the payment of his rent. The creation of a large number of allotment farms would make the establishment of a creamery necessary, where the milk could be brought in every day and converted into butter by the most modern methods with the least possible delay. Dairying, which has in some places on the continent almost developed to a fine art, is in a very backward condition in this country, but by cooperation among the coteers and an intelligent headquarters staff, much could be done which at present appears impossible. The tenant will be allowed permanent tenancy on payment of an annual rent or land tax, subject, of course, to such necessary regulations which may be made for the prevention of intemperance and immorality, and the preservation of the fundamental features of the colony. In this way, our farm colony will throw off small colonies all around it, until the original site is but the center of a whole series of small farms, where those whom we have rescued and trained will live, if not under their own vine and fig tree, at least in the midst of their own little fruit farm, and surrounded by their small flocks and herds. The cottages will be so many detached residences, each standing in its own ground, not so far away from its neighbors as to deprive its occupants of the benefit of human intercourse. Cooperative farm. Side by side with the farm colony proper, I should propose to renew the experiment of Mr. E. T. Craig, which he found work so successfully at Rallahine. When any members of the original colony had pulled themselves sufficiently together to desire to begin again on their own account, I should group some of them as partners in a cooperative farm, and see whether or no the success achieved in County Clare could not be repeated in Essex or in Kent. I cannot have more unpromising material to deal with than the wild Irishman on Colonel Vandeleur's estate, and I would certainly take care to be safeguarded against any such mishap as destroyed the early promise of Rallahine. I shall look upon this as one of the most important experiments of the entire series, and if, as I anticipate, it can be worked successfully, that is, if the results of Rallahine can be secured on a larger scale, I shall consider that the problem of the employment of the people and the use of the land and the food supply for the globe is unquestionably solved, were its inhabitants many times greater in number than they are. Without saying more, some idea will be obtained as to what I propose from the story of Rallahine related briefly at the close of this volume. End of Section 20. Section 21. New Britain, the colony over sea. We now come to the third and final stage of the regenerative process, the colony over sea. To mention oversea is sufficient with some people to damn the scheme. A prejudice against emigration has been diligently fostered in certain quarters by those who have openly admitted that they did not wish to deplete the ranks of the army of discontent at home. For the more discontented people you have here, the more trouble you can give the government, and the more power you have to bring about the general overturn, which is the only thing in which they see any hope for the future. Some again object to emigration on the ground that it is transportation. I confess that I have great sympathy with those who object to emigration as carried on hitherto, and if it be a consolation to any of my critics, I may say at once that so far from compulsory expatriating any Englishman, I shall refuse to have any part or lot in emigrating any man or woman who does not voluntarily wish to be sent out. A journey over sea is a very different thing now to what it was when a voyage to Australia consumed more than 6 months, when emigrants were crowded by hundreds into sailing ships, and scenes of abominable sin and brutality were the normal incidents of the passage. The world has grown much smaller since the electric telegraph was discovered, and side by side with the shrinkage of this planet under the influence of steam and electricity, there has come a sense of brotherhood and a consciousness of community of interest and of nationality on the part of the English-speaking people throughout the world. To change from Devon to Australia is not such a change in many respects as merely to cross over from Devon to Normandy. In Australia, the emigrant finds himself among men and women of the same habits, the same language, and in fact the same people, excepting that they live under the Southern Cross instead of in the northern latitudes. The reduction of the postage between England and the colonies, a reduction which I hope will soon be followed by the establishment of the universal penny post between the English-speaking lands, will further tend to lessen the sense of distance. The constant traveling of the colonists backwards and forwards to England makes it absurd to speak of the colonies as if they were a foreign land. They are simply pieces of Britain distributed about the world, enabling the Britisher to have access to the richest parts of the earth. Another objection which will be taken to this scheme is that the colonists already overseas will see with infinite alarm the prospect of the transfer of our waste labor to their country. It is easy to understand how this misconception will arise, but there is not much danger of opposition on this score. The working men who rule the roost at Melbourne object to the introduction of fresh workmen into their labor market for the same reason that the new dockers' union objects to the appearance of new hands at the dock gates. That is, for fear the newcomers will enter into unfriendly competition with them. But no colony, not even the protectionist and trade unionists who govern Victoria, could rationally object to the introduction of trained colonists planted out upon the land. They would see that these men would become a source of wealth, simply because they would at once become producers as well as consumers, and instead of cutting down wages, they would tend directly to improve trade, and so increase the employment of the worker now in the colony. Emigration, as hitherto conducted, has been carried out on directly opposite principles to these. Men and women have simply been shot down into countries without any regard to their possession of ability to earn a livelihood, and have consequently become an incubus upon the energies of the community, and a discredit, expense, and burden. The result is that they gravitate to the towns and compete with the colonial workmen, and thereby drive down wages. We shall avoid that mistake. We need not wonder that Australians and other colonists should object to their countries being converted into a sort of dumping ground on which to deposit men and women totally unsuited for the new circumstances in which they find themselves. Moreover, looking at it from the aspect of the class itself, would such emigration be of any enduring value? It is not merely more favorable circumstances that are required by these crowds, but those habits of industry, truthfulness, and self-restraint, which will enable them to profit by better conditions if they could only come to possess them. According to the most reliable information, there are already, sadly, too many of the same classes we want to help in countries supposed to be the paradise of the working man. What could be done with a people whose first inquiry on reaching a foreign land would be for a whiskey shop, and who were utterly ignorant of those forms of labor and habits of industry absolutely indispensable to the earning of a subsistence amid the hardships of an emigrant's life? Such would naturally shrink from the self-denial the new circumstances inevitably called for, and rather than suffer the inconveniences connected with a settler's life, would probably sink down into helpless despair, or settle in the slums of the first city they came to. These difficulties, in my estimation, bar the way to the immigration of any considerable scale of the submerged tenth. And yet I am strongly of opinion, with the majority of those who have thought and written on political economy, that emigration is the only remedy for this mighty evil. Now, the oversea colony plan, I think, meets these difficulties. 1, in the preparation of the colony for the people. 2, in the preparation of the people for the colony. And 3, in the arrangements that are rendered possible for the transport of the people when prepared. It is proposed to secure a large tract of land in some country suitable to our purpose. We have thought of South Africa, to begin with. We are in no way pledged to this part of the world, or to it alone. There is nothing to prevent our establishing similar settlements in Canada, Australia, or some other land. British Columbia has been strongly urged upon our notice. Indeed, it is certain, if this scheme proves the success we anticipate, the first colony will be the forerunner of similar communities elsewhere. Africa, however, presents to us great advantages for the moment. There is any amount of land suitable for our purpose which can be obtained, we think, without difficulty. The climate is healthy, labor is in great demand, so that if by any means work failed on the colony, there would be abundant opportunities for securing good wages from the neighboring companies. The colony and the colonists. Before any decision is arrived at, however, information will be obtained as to the position and character of the land, the accessibility of markets for commodities, communication with Europe, and other necessary particulars. The next business would be to obtain on grant, or otherwise, a sufficient tract of suitable country for the purpose of a colony, on conditions that would meet its present and future character. After obtaining a title to the country, the next business will be to effect a settlement in it. This, I suppose, will be accomplished by sending a competent body of men, under skilled supervision, to fix on a suitable location for the first settlement, erecting such buildings as would be required, enclosing and breaking up the land, putting in first crops, and so storing sufficient supplies of food for the future. Then a supply of colonists would be sent out to join them, and from time to time other detachments, as the colony was prepared to receive them. Further locations could then be chosen, and more country broken up, and before a very long period has passed, the colony would be capable of receiving and absorbing a continuous stream of emigration of considerable proportions. The next work would be the establishment of a strong and efficient government, prepared to carry out and enforce the same laws and discipline to which the colonists had been accustomed in England, together with such alterations and additions as the new circumstances would render necessary. The colonists would become responsible for all that concerned their own support. That is to say, they would buy and sell, engage in trade, hire servants, and transact all the ordinary business affairs of everyday life. Our headquarters in England would represent the colony in this country on their behalf, and with money supplied by them when once fairly established, would buy for their agents what they were at the outset unable to produce themselves, such as machinery and the like, also selling their produce to the best advantage. All land, timber, minerals, and the like would be rented to the colonists. All unearned increments and improvements on the land would be held on behalf of the entire community and utilized for its great advantages, a certain percentage being set apart for the extension of its borders and the continued transmission of colonists from England in increasing numbers. Arrangements would be made for the temporary accommodation of new arrivals, officers being maintained for the purpose of taking them in hand on landing and directing and controlling them generally. So far as possible, they would be introduced to work without any waste of time, situations being ready for them to enter upon. And anyway, their wants would be supplied till this was the case. There would be friends who would welcome and care for them, not merely on the principle of profit and loss, but on the ground of friendship and religion, many of whom the immigrants would probably have known before in the old country, together with all the social influences, restraints, and religious enjoyments to which the colonists have been accustomed. After dealing with the preparation of the colony for the colonists, we now come to the preparation of the colonists for the colony oversea. They would be prepared by an education in honesty, truth, and industry, without which we could not indulge in any hope of their succeeding. While men and women would be received into the city colony without character, none would be sent over the sea who had not been proved worthy of this trust. They would be inspired with an ambition to do well for themselves and their fellow colonists. They would be instructed in all that concerned their future career. They would be taught those industries in which they would be most profitably employed. They would be inured to the hardships they would have to endure. They would be accustomed to the economies they would have to practice. They would be made acquainted with the comrades with whom they would have to live and labor. They would be accustomed to the government, orders, and regulations which they would have to obey. They would be educated, so far as the opportunity served, in those habits of patience, forbearance, and affection which would so largely tend to their own welfare, and to the successful carrying out of this part of our scheme. Transport to the colony oversea. We now come to the question of transport. This certainly has an element of difficulty in it if the remedy is to be applied on a very large scale, but this will appear of less importance if we consider that the largeness of the number will reduce the individual cost. Emigrants can be conveyed to such a location in South Africa as we have in view by ones and twos at £8 per head, including land journey. And, no doubt, were a large number carried, this figure would be reduced considerably. Many of the colonists would have friends who would assist them with the cost of passage, money, and outfit. All the unmarried will have earned something on the city and farm colonies, which will go toward meeting their passage money. In the course of time, relatives who are comfortably settled in the colony will save money and assist their kindred in getting out to them. We have the examples before our eyes in Australia and the United States of how those countries have in this form absorbed from Europe millions of poor struggling people. All colonists and emigrants generally will bind themselves in a legal instrument to repay all moneys, expenses of passage, outfit, or otherwise, which would in turn be utilized in sending out further contingents. On the plan named, if prudently carried out and generously assisted, the transfer of the entire surplus population of this country is not only possible, but would, we think, in process of time, be effected with enormous advantage to the people themselves, to this country, and to the country of their adoption. The history of Australia and the United States evidences this. It is quite true the first settlers in the latter were people superior in every way for such an enterprise to the bulk of those who we propose to send out. But it is equally true that large numbers of the most ignorant and vicious of our European populations have been pouring into that country ever since without affecting its prosperity. And this colony overseas would have the immense advantage at the outset which would come from a government and discipline carefully adapted to its peculiar circumstances, and rigidly enforced in every particular. I would guard against misconception in relation to this colony overseas by pointing out that all my proposals here are necessarily tentative and experimental. There is no intention on my part to stick to any of these suggestions if, on maturer consideration and consultation with practical men, they can be improved upon. Mr. Arnold White, who has already conducted 2 parties of colonists to South Africa, is one of the few men in this country who has had practical experience of the actual difficulties of colonization. I have, through a mutual friend, had the advantage of comparing notes with him very fully, and I venture to believe that there is nothing in this scheme that is not in harmony with the result of his experience. In a couple of months this book will be read all over the world. It will bring me a plentiful crop of suggestions, and, I hope, offers of service from many valuable and experienced colonists in every country. In the due order of things, the colony overseas is the last to be started. Long before our first batch of colonists is ready to cross the ocean, I shall be in a position to correct and revise the proposals of this chapter by the best wisdom and matured experience of the practical men of every colony in the empire. End of section 21. Section 22. Universal Emigration. We have, in our remarks on the overseas colony, referred to the general consensus of opinion on the part of those who have studied the social question as to emigration being the only remedy for the overcrowded population of this country, at the same time showing some of the difficulties which lie in the way of the adoption of the remedy, the dislike of the people to so great a change as is involved in going from one country to another, the cost of their transfer, and their general unfitness for an emigrant's life. These difficulties, as I think we have seen, are fully met by the overseas colony scheme. But apart from those who, driven by their abject poverty, will avail themselves of our scheme, there are multitudes of people all over the country who would be likely to emigrate could they be assisted in so doing. Those we propose to help in the following manner. 1. By opening a bureau in London and appointing officers whose business it will be to acquire every kind of information as to suitable countries, their adaptation to, and the openings they present for different trades and callings, the possibility of obtaining land and employment, the rates of remuneration, and the like. These enquiries will include the cost of passage money, railway fares, outfit, together with every kind of information required by an emigrant. 2. From this bureau anyone may obtain all necessary information. 3. Special terms will be arranged with steamships, railway companies, and land agents, of which emigrants using the bureau will have the advantage. 4. Introductions will be supplied as far as possible to agents and friends in the localities to which the emigrant may be proceeding. 5. Intending emigrants, desirous of saving money, can deposit it through this bureau in the Army Bank for that purpose. 6. It is expected that government contractors and other employers of labor requiring colonists of reliable character will apply to this bureau for such, offering favorable terms with respect to passage money, employment, and other advantages. 7. No immigrant will be sent out in response to any application from abroad where the immigrant's expenses are defrayed without reference to character, industry, and fitness. This bureau, we think, will be especially useful to women and young girls. There must be a large number of such in this country living in semi-starvation, anyway with very poor prospects, who would be very welcome abroad, the expense of whose transfer governments and masters and mistresses alike would be very glad to defray or assist in defraying, if they could only be assured on both sides of the beneficial character of the arrangements when made. So widespread now are the operations of the Army, and so extensively will this Bureau multiply its agencies, that it will speedily be able to make personal inquiries on both sides, that is, in the interest alike of the emigrant and the intended employer in any part of the world. The Salvation Ship. When we have selected a party of emigrants whom we believe to be sufficiently prepared to settle on the land which has been got ready for them in the colony oversea, it will be no dismal expatriation which will await them. No one who has ever been on the west coast of Ireland when the emigrants were departing, and has heard the dismal wails which arise from those who are taking leave of each other for the last time on earth, can fail to sympathize with the horror excited in many minds by the very word emigration. But when our party sets out, there will be no violent wrenching of home ties. In our ship we shall export them all, father, mother, and children. The individuals will be grouped in families, and the families will, on the farm colony, have been for some months past more or less near neighbors, meeting each other in the field, in the workshops, and in the religious services. It will resemble nothing so much as the unmooring of a little piece of England and towing it across the sea to find a safe anchorage in a sunnier clime. The ship which takes out emigrants will bring back the produce of the farms, and constant traveling to and fro will lead more than ever to the feeling that we and our ocean-sundered brethren are members of one family. No one who has ever crossed the ocean can have failed to be impressed with the mischief that comes to emigrants when they are on their way to their destination. Many and many a girl has dated her downfall from the temptations which beset her while journeying to a land where she had hoped to find a happier future. Satan finds some mischief still for idle hands to do, and he must have his hands full on board an emigrant ship. Look into the steerage at any time, and you will find boredom inexpressible on every face. The men have nothing to do, and an incident of no more importance than the appearance of a sail upon the distant horizon is an event which makes the whole ship talk. I do not see why this should be so. Of course, in the case of conveying passengers and freight with the utmost possible expedition for short distances, it would be idle to expect that either time or energies could be spared for the employment or instruction of the passengers. But the case is different when, instead of going to America, the emigrant turns his face to South Africa or remote Australia. Then, even with the fastest steamers, they must remain some weeks or months upon the high seas. The result is that habits of idleness are contracted, bad acquaintances are formed, and very often the moral and religious work of a lifetime is undone. To avoid these evil consequences, I think we should be compelled to have a ship of our own as soon as possible. A sailing vessel might be found the best adapted for the work. Leaving out the question of time, which would be of very secondary importance with us, the construction of a sailing ship would afford more space for the accommodation of emigrants and for industrial occupation, and would involve considerably less working expenses, besides costing much less at the onset, even if we did not have one given to us, which I should think would be very probable. All the emigrants would be under the charge of army officers, and instead of the voyage being demoralizing, it would be made instructive and profitable. From leaving London to landing at their destination, every colonist would be under watchful oversight, could receive instruction in those particulars where they were still needing it, and be subjected to influences that would be beneficial every way. Then we have seen that one of the great difficulties in the direction of emigration is the cost of transport. The expense of conveying a man from England to Australia, occupying as it does some 7 or 8 weeks, arises not so much from the expense connected with the working of the vessel which carries him as the amount of provisions he consumes during the passage. Now, with this plan, I think that the emigrants might be made to earn at least a portion of this outlay. There is no reason why a man should not work on board ship any more than on land. Of course, nothing much could be done when the weather was very rough, but the average number of days during which it would be impossible for passengers to employ themselves profitably in the time spent between the Channel and Cape Town or Australia would be comparatively few. When the ship was pitching and rolling, work would be difficult, but even then, when the colonists get their sea legs and are free from the qualmishness which overtakes landsmen when first getting afloat, I cannot see why they should not engage in some form of industrial work far more profitable than yawning and lounging about the deck, to say nothing of the fact that by so doing they would lighten the expense of their transit. The sailors, firemen, engineers, and everybody else connected with the vessel have to work, and there is no reason why our colonists should not work also. Of course, this method would require special arrangements in the fitting up of the vessel, which, if it were our own, it would not be difficult to make. At first sight, it may seem difficult to find employments on board ship which could be engaged in to advantage, and it might not be found possible to fix up every individual right away. But I think there would be very few of the class and character of people we should take out, with the prior instructions they would have received, who would not have fitted themselves into some useful labor before the voyage ended. To begin with, there would be a large amount of the ordinary ship's work that the colonists could perform, such as the preparation of food, serving it out, cleaning the decks and fittings of the ship generally, together with the loading and unloading of cargo. All these operations could be readily done under the direction of permanent hands. Then shoemaking, knitting, sewing, tailoring, and other kindred occupations could be engaged in. I should think sewing machines could be worked, and one way or another any amount of garments could be manufactured which would find ready and profitable sale on landing, either among the colonists themselves or with the people round about. Not only would the ship thus be a perfect hive of industry, it would also be a floating temple. The captain, officers, and every member of the crew would be Salvationists, and all, therefore, alike interested in the enterprise. Moreover, the probabilities are that we should obtain the service of the ship's officers and crew in the most inexpensive manner, in harmony with the usages of the army everywhere else, men serving from love and not as a mere business. The effect produced by our ship cruising slowly southward, testifying to the reality of a salvation for both worlds, calling at all convenient ports, would constitute a new kind of mission work, and drawing out everywhere a large amount of warm, practical sympathy. At present, the influence of those who go down to the sea in ships is not always in favor of raising the morals and religion of the dwellers in the places where they come. Here, however, would be one ship at least whose appearance foretold no disorder, gave rise to no debauchery, and from whose capacious hull would stream forth an army of men who, instead of thronging the grog-shops and other haunts of licentious indulgence, would occupy themselves with explaining and proclaiming the religion of the love of God and the brotherhood of man. End of section 22.